What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Bunny Operator here. Thanks for coming back. This is episode 5 of Inside the Industry, and today we have my buddy Joey. And for those of you that follow his account and follow my account, know who he is. His Instagram account is 9mm Musashi. For those that don't know who he is, I'll let Joey introduce himself and give a little intro. Go ahead, Joey.
How's it going? Like I said, my name is Joey. I was born in Kyoto, Japan. Moved to America when I was pretty young. I went to UCLA, majored in geography, minored in Asian languages and cultures. And I started off, I'm a police officer, but I started off with Los Angeles Police Department. Went through the academy there. I was the top shooter and the top overall recruit in my class. And I worked West LA as well as Hollywood. Ended up moving up to the Bay Area about 5.5 years ago. I worked for a small department, less than 100 sworn. And I'm currently on our SWAT team. I'm a firearms instructor and a first aid instructor. Like I said, I run the 9mm Musashi account. I also run Police Post Training, which is a Instagram page just dedicated to law enforcement training points and discussion. And through that, I'm affiliated with the Effective Fitness Training app, which is a fitness app that's basically dedicated to law enforcement. And then on the side, I'm a company commander in the Army Reserve.
Nice. That's pretty cool. I didn't know about the your other accounts. Maybe send that info and I'll include it in the link below or add it to the screenshot here or something. What languages did you specialize in school? You said you went to UCLA, was it?
Yeah, so I did Japanese wasn't a minor, so it was ALC with a minor or with an emphasis in Japanese. But there were other languages you could minor in, but Japanese wasn't one, so I just ALC minor, but an emphasis in Japanese.
Nice, interesting. Okay, and then I'm sure you're going to get into this at some point too. But when we spoke last time, you said that you came over and then earned your citizenship through the Army. I think it was, right?
Yeah. So actually, I was a Japanese citizen, and like I said, we'll probably get into that in a little bit. But I did give up my Japanese citizenship when I joined the Army.
Okay. Well, I guess that segues right off to the question, the second question, because you essentially give yourself an overview of what you do already. So your background, your Asian American history, as far as coming here, I guess we can start off with that.
Yeah. So I don't know that I have, the typical Asian American experience.
Okay.
I'm obviously what's commonly referred to as a Happa. So my mom is a Japanese, actually born and raised in Japan, and my father is an American white, and he actually speaks fluent, unaccented Japanese. He did a lot of living in Japan. So I don't, again, like I said, I don't think I really have a typical Asian experience. I think a lot of the emphasis my parents wanted to place on me was kind of being my own person, just growing up, like not trying to identify as anything. And obviously, like when I was in Japan and I'd be, the little kid at the playground, like I could hear Japanese kids making fun of me. And I think all that kind of shaped my perception of like racism, because in my head, I'm like, well, I'm just going to go over there and talk to them. And once they find out who I am and that I'm, I can speak Japanese and they'll be cool with me. And, it always worked out that way. But obviously that's not how the whole world works, and not everyone has the same mentality as me, where I'm like, hey, these people are making fun of me. Let me go over and make friends with them, And I think, like I said, I've always I brought this up at the APA GOA thing, but I always kind of scoffed at the idea of like an identity-based organization. And it wasn't until the last year that, different people started asking for my feedback on some of the stuff that was going on. And I guess I look Asian enough that people care about my opinion on that. But as I said at the APA GOA thing, if someone doesn't see people that look like them in doing something, for example, in the firearms world, one might be inclined to say, hey, that might not be for me. So I do think, in this last year, that's something that has become important to me, is making sure that Asians feel represented in the shooting community and in the Second Amendment, because obviously that's something that applies to everyone. But historically speaking, Asians and Asian Americans haven't really been at the top or the forefront of gun ownership and Second Amendment representation.
Right. I mean, even though like majority of society, or at least we would like to think so, majority of society has evolved to the point where we don't necessarily react based on different skin tones or even somebody that's just different from us. But there is still that inherent factor of human nature and tribalism where we just automatically associate or befriend or be a little bit more friendly towards folks who look like us, or who act like us. And that's just kind of the nature of humans, I guess. So what age did you come over to the US then?
I honestly don't remember. I was really young. So
Okay. Okay.
I do an extensive amount of living in Japan. I just go back and visit.
I see. The reason why I ask is because even though you stated that your childhood is not quote unquote the typical Asian American experience, if you will, I mean that's still the form of in Japan. The story that you mentioned. I mean, did you look more apparently white than you did Asian as a child?
I think in a society like Japan, which is so much more homogenous than America, like I'm very clearly not full purebred Japanese. And I remember my dad told me a story much years after it actually happened, but he told me that someone had actually told him to take your half-breed kid and get out of Japan.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, and obviously that was like not a common occurrence, and I didn't grow up like constantly facing racism in that sense. But that was something he told me. Once I became an adult, he said, "Hey, this happened when you were a little kid." So yeah.
Well, that certainly is certainly is your experience, and I'm pretty sure that there are folks out there, and several of the Happas or even folks who just don't look 100% Asian who've experienced similar incidents or similar upbringings, if you will, from their own cultures. And that does happen. We see that in examples of mixed black and white kids too, because they're kind of shunned by both or one or the other. I mean, we've seen that. It's pretty common even in the mainstream. And so, I mean, since you did come to the United States at a younger age, I would assume that means you pretty much grew up here then after the fact, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I did a lot of my growing up in Massachusetts, and then we moved to Southern California. So yeah, Ventura County.
And then your experiences growing up as I guess a young, like up and coming shooter, I guess, in the U.S., and that was atypical as well, or not?
I don't know that I really would have said it was typical or atypical. I think where my parents live, that's where I did a lot of my growing up, and come to find out that a lot of the neighbors actually get together and shoot now, which is kind of funny. But we got into. I didn't really know any other kids that were shooting, and I didn't really get into shooting until like high school. Got into shooting in high school. I shot like a 22 at camp when I was like 6, but I don't think I was probably 14 the first time that I actually shot. And I don't think that I knew really any other kids at my high school that were really into shooting.
I see.
But that was something my dad and I did together. That was kind of like our father-son activity.
Okay. So how did that eventually segue towards, I guess, your more refined shooting or more deep dive into the firearms world?
So I started working at Angela's shooting range in college part-time. So I'd do that on the weekends. And then, on the days of class, on days I didn't have class during the week, I'd go up there for a few hours as well. So that's when I started kind of getting serious about trying to be better as a shooter, just objectively. And then, at that time, that's when like Magpul was coming out with all their videos. So of course I bought some of those and
the DVDs.
Yeah, the DVDs. Yeah, the dynamic handgun and all that. But I think that was kind of the thing where in college I figured out I was already doing ROTC, so I already knew that military or law enforcement was a path for me. And it wasn't until my senior year of college that I decided I wanted to do full-time law enforcement and be in the reserves. But the time that I had spent at the range, working on those skill sets actually translated well to the academy and being able to shoot. And that's one of those things, the less things that you have to stress about, the better it is during the academy itself.
Okay. So that means that your pathway, or Is it safe to say that you're already a proficient shooter before you hit the academy?
I'd say it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Did you find that the academy improved anything, or?
Um, there was a lot of stuff that I hadn't done before because everything that I had done up to that point was, at Angeles, which is an outdoor range. And, you have there's like the 7-yard pistol thing, and then there's the little gallery, and then you can set up stands at different ranges, but you're not really getting a lot of the experiences that, shooting from retention or shooting out of a vehicle or stuff like that you do in the academy, and a lot of fast shooting that you're not allowed to do on most civilian ranges. So that was something that was a good new learning experience for me, something that I actually really did enjoy getting to do all that. So
Yeah, it's different, right? I mean, it pushes you to a challenge that you weren't able to do yourself, and also the fact that you're under pressure, even if it's just practicing, there is an instructor or somebody else that's aiding you through the way. So after the fact, post graduation, and let's say to where you are now, since you are an instructor for your respective agency as well, what do you think of the academy's course of fire and instruction based on what you know now and your own experiences?
I think LAPD actually does have a pretty good squared away program. I think there's certain little things that maybe, and granted, it's been a while since I went through the academy, so I don't want to sound like I'm, saying things about how it is now, because I'm not sure. But I do know some of the instructors that actually are instructors outside, so I know that they're going out and getting some pretty good training as is. But the only things that really, for me, they had us shooting with like the cross thumbs. And when I started going at speed, I would revert to a regular shooting grip. And one of the instructors saw that and said, "Hey, just keep doing that. Like, it's obvious that you've been training that way for a while." But overall, I really do think LAPD has a pretty good program of, hey, here's someone who's never picked up a gun before. Let's get them in the next 6 months competent, that they're able to pass all these quals. And some, the combat qual, that's what people have to shoot in order to be able to carry a 1911. That's actually a pretty challenging course of fire. And they had, I think, I'm trying to remember how many people passed that by the end of the academy. But like I said, that one is actually a kind of challenging qual. And those are, if you ever seen an LAPD officer with a shooting medal, that's what that's from.
With the shooting what? Sorry.
The little medal on their lapels. So that's from passing the combat qual. And there's, the bronze, silver, and gold.
I assume that's on the dress and not their street uniforms, right?
I think you wear that on. I think you can wear that on your wolves.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. I mean, I asked because, my experiences in speaking with some other folks who've gone through this level of training, if you will, too, is that the post requirements are in general pretty basic. I know it's up to every academy to kind of run their own thing. But I'm asking is essentially because there are really good instructors out there who are in the field, and they do try to pass on more information than what's required by post, right? Because, I mean, you look at the bare minimum 832 requirement for like peace officer qualification, it's pretty basic. 832 by itself doesn't even have night quals. Granted, an RBC does, a regular basic academy does have night quals, but I mean, bare minimum 832 doesn't even have that. So yeah, I mean, that's why I was just basically asking you to see if our experiences were pretty similar. But it's good to know. I mean, I don't have a doubt that LAPD, being such a large agency, they just kind of do their own thing out there. It doesn't surprise me that they're pretty much squared away. Were there any particular hurdles that you found or you thought you experienced while growing up or going through the academy? Not necessarily from a firearms perspective, but just life lessons kind of thing.
Life lessons kind of thing. I would say, I don't know if you've ever read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
I have not, but I'm aware of the book.
I would recommend that. Very early on, my parents really instilled the importance of owning your mistakes into me. And so they had put me into martial arts. I did Shotokan karate growing up. And I was teaching by the time I was a teenager. But I've made a lot of mistakes throughout my life. Obviously nothing career ending. But it's impossible to go through life without making any errors. And I think that having that mindset of owning your mistakes is something that's helped me tremendously. And I'll give the example of, when I was a senior first lieutenant in the military, I was kind of had it in my mind that I was going to get out, and I was very disengaged as a leader. And I was just kind of just coasting and floating through, doing the bare minimum. And I ended up getting a really good NCO mentor that kind of started calling me out when I was slacking off, and he was holding me accountable. And that kind of completely changed my mindset about what I was doing in the military and the importance of it. And so I made captain, and they were looking at giving me command of a unit. And the battalion commander had hit me up and he said, "Hey, what do you think of taking command of this company, blah, blah, blah." And it came up that, he said, "Oh, I guess you and your previous first line leader didn't really see eye to eye." And I said, "No, that's not the case. The case was that I was a very uninvolved officer and leader, and that was completely my fault." And that's something where, I did make a mistake in the grand scheme of things. I was not a good officer, but because I owned that and showed that I was capable of taking responsibility for my own actions or inactions, that's something that ended up, in the grand scheme of things, that really made that battalion commander say, "Oh, okay, like I can trust this guy because I know that if he screws up, he'll own it."
Nice. And I don't know how long ago that was, but I imagine that's sort of just shaped how you do things moving forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice.
That was a few years ago now, but that's something, in everything I try to do, just owning it and saying like, "Hey, if I screwed up, I screwed up. Like, let me know how I can fix it," instead of, because I'm dealing with someone who's been trying to cover up some mistakes, and that's something that always bites you in the ass.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of that saying where you should always be humble and own up to things, right? And fall on your own sword, if you will, because that's the only way to move forward, or at least to continuously develop as a person. So you're from working from the range, going through the academy and the military. Well, I guess the military's boot camp or academy portion. Where in your, I guess, timeline did you start to get even more heavier to the firearm side and go towards instruction, and then to where you are now with your accounts?
So I've always been super into shooting. And a lot of that, hey, like when I was working at the range, I would shoot on my lunch break. It used to be I could get a box of ammo for $10, and I'd eat my lunch really quick, and I'd shoot that box and just work on different stuff. And it's funny because one of my managers was always giving me a hard time. He's like, "You're just shooting up your salary there." And I'm like, "Oh, it'll pay off eventually." And it wasn't actually until I got to my new department. Like I said, I was always into shooting. I loved shooting. But once I got to my new department, everything for the most part at my agency is a collateral duty, which means full-time I'm patrol, but we're a part-time SWAT team. All these different jobs are in addition to your primary responsibility of patrol or detectives or whatever you're doing. For me, it's patrol. And so when I got to this department, they were already super chill about, hey, like you can just come up and shoot during the range qualifying cycles. Like just when people aren't running through the cycles, you can go ahead and shoot. So I kind of developed this reputation of just going up and shooting up all the department's ammo. And so after a couple of years, they had an opening. I actually failed the first time. I couldn't pass the instructor's qualification course. So when they opened it up about, 6 months later, I was able to pass at that. Actually, no, it was more than 6 months because we had transitioned to the new guns maybe a year later, a year or more later. We transitioned to SIG P320s, and I shot with that, and I actually ended up passing on that. And then during that time, I started actually getting into social media just for fun. I'm not an influencer or a celebrity or anything. I was just like posting stuff that I enjoy. And I ended up making a lot of really good connections, one of them being police posts. He hit me up and said, hey, do you want to run this? Originally, it started as a backup account, and it kind of took on its own life. He said, hey, just run with it. So I've been running police post training since 2017, 2018. I think 2017. And as a result of that, I'm always talking about, hey, law enforcement as a profession needs to be doing a better job of going out and getting training. As a result of running that page, I actually ended up making a lot of really good connections within the training world. And I got to attend all these different training courses. So as a result of doing that, I was able to, bring that back to the department and run different trainings. Last year, they actually let me run the whole department as like the sole instructor for everyone.
Nice.
And I kind of just did a combination of like different things I picked up from all these different classes. We did injured shooter stuff, all kinds of different stuff. But as a result of all these connections I made through social media, I ended up getting to do all this training and then bring it back to the department. So social media, people say how horrible it is. It all depends on how you use it. Any tool can be used incorrectly. So assuming you're able to, limit yourself and not get totally sucked into it, it's actually a very powerful tool for making connections and getting good information and spreading good information, which is stuff that I'm trying to do with both my personal account and the training account.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we certainly do learn, at least even in my experience. Like I just started mine in January, I think was my accounts. And I've learned that the community is very tight. It's small. It is very small, especially the firearms community is very small. Or at least to the same level of the thought processes that you and I, as well as other similar instructors, that mentality that we all seem to share, it's very small. It is limited, and there are a lot of people that are interested in firearms, but not necessarily to the level of training that's out there. And I guess it's a slow learning process that people have to go through. So, the event that we went through for the Asian Pacific American Gun Owners Association, or APAGOA, so that was kind of one of those examples of that. It was essentially a new shooter thing. We find that even in our respective state, there's still a ton of new shooters or people that don't even own firearms yet. And I expect that number to continuously increase, or rather the number of non-firearm owners to decrease and the number of new firearms owners to increase. And we did see that even in that those groups that were there was a lot of just brand new, completely oblivious to everything. But there was also folks who had somewhat of an experience. But even though their skill levels were kind of sporadic, like all over the place, I think that you pointed out Kelly's student was the best shot for the whole day. I mean, she was drilling that circle. She's never touched a gun before, and that's just like an inherent skill. To me, maybe that's something that should be nurtured in the firearms community. Like new shooters like that level of encouragement to get them to keep trying and pushing, and doing new things. Do you find that through your channels on not only the law enforcement training side, but also on your personal, on the Musashi account, do you find that people seek information from you or this type of training?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it will be, hey, like, what do you think of this company? Or have you trained with these guys before? There's, like I said, social media can be a great tool. I've been lucky that I found some really good connections, dudes that have actually been great mentors for me as I try to develop as a shooter and also as an instructor. So I'll hit them up and ask them about stuff as well. But at the same time, people are asking me, or a lot of it will be gear stuff too. Like, oh, hey, what holster do I get for this? Or like, what do you think of this? So that happens definitely a lot. And I answer every DM except for all the spam ones that I've been getting lately with the giant group group
Mhm.
text of like, oh, like come see what I do on my webcam. I'm like,
Yeah.
just delete. But I do answer all my DMs. On the police post training one, I have someone that answers those for me. He does all the stories and all the DMs, but on the Musashi page, I do all those myself. So like I said, I do try to be that figure that, like, if someone has never experienced the gun world, maybe you think, oh, it's filled with a bunch of douchebags or whatever. I try to make sure that I'm as inviting and friendly and being a good representative of the Second Amendment community as I can be.
Nice. Do you find that the two accounts blend together sometimes? Like I know that the police one's very police centric, but I'm sure you probably get civilians that reach out to you too on that account.
A little bit. So that one, I forget how many followers that page has. I think it's like 66,000. But a lot of them are cops. I think I polled once, and like, I don't know, maybe a third to a half said they were cops. And again, that's not scientific. That's just
Right.
a story like, hey, are you currently law enforcement? But we do get a lot of people, civilians, asking questions like, hey, like this use of force, why did they do that? And that's another one of those things where that's an opportunity for me as a police officer to be a good ambassador for my profession. And to not just shut people down. Like I've actually had some really good conversations with people that started, they started super hostile with me. And just by the way I responded to them at the end of it, they're like, hey, okay, you're actually okay. But as far as kind of crossover between the two, they're very separate. The Musashi page is all my personal stuff. So I've been posting a lot of pictures of my new toy. I just got a Henry lever action. So I've been posting a lot of pictures of that. But that one's just my own personal stuff, my toys, my dog, my cooking, some philosophy stuff. But the police post training page is all dedicated to breaking down scenarios from critical use of force or whatever the case may be.
Nice. Yeah, I mean that certainly is important to you on that the more police oriented, just because the very nature of how law enforcement as a whole operates, or it's like no two agencies are the same, even within the same state or even neighboring cities, rather neighboring jurisdictions. Everyone does things a little bit different. So I think having a centralized resource like that on the national levels is pretty important, or at least for the individual officer or even hopefuls or folks who are looking to get into that field now. It certainly is a difficult time for everybody, including active duty or people looking to get into it, and the supporters too, because we have a good mixed bag of folks who are vehemently pro LE. We have the folks in the middle ground; they're just kind of neutral. Then you have your folks that are just on the polar opposite side. On what is it? ACAB is what it is, I think. And it's difficult, but I think that the more public exposure you have with this type of information to show that, yeah, there are officers that are willing to go the extra mile to go through that additional form of training and education, that certainly helps from a public perspective. I think too that California specifically probably has the highest number of hours per recruit in their academy, right? I mean, we have some agencies in the United States that don't even require like high school diplomas in order for you to get on. So there certainly is a large variation between requirements. Okay. So between your accounts or your personal goals here, do you have any upcoming events or things you're working on?
Yeah, so I've been super, super busy lately between the military, and we're very short staffed at work. So we did just do actually a photo shoot a couple months ago for effective fitness training. So my next goal is to do an actual range event that we film that, do some edits of that. I'm working on a red dot pilot program for my agency. Unfortunately, with the way things are going as far as staffing and then COVID and everything, it's kind of been start stop on that. But that's something that I would that I've been working on trying to get implemented. They did send me to a red dot class with Ravenwing down in SoCal.
Nice.
So that's something in the next couple of years I'd like to get up and running. I also want to try to do a vehicle CQB in service for the department. That's something that I was lucky enough to go to Will Petty's vehicle CQB class, which is a 5-day intensive course. And that's something I'd like to try to do an end user class, just a 1 day for the department next time they let me run ranges. And in the next year or two, I want to try to start competing for shooting. I still actually haven't shot competitively. So I think
on a personal level.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, I think that would be a good, humbling learning experience. So that's another one.
You probably hook up with Hui. He shoots competitively frequently also, and and he does pretty well. I mean, I've seen him place first few times. Granted, there's also Mike down in SoCal. I mean, that guy's he shoots for Terran, but I mean, I'm sure we can make connections if you needed to. And then for your RDS transition project for work, if you guys are using Glock MOS style pistols for issue, no, you guys have 320s, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, what was it? I think might actually have plates for you guys from Four Controls. Actually, I think Roger was. I know they have acro plates. I'm not sure about RMR, but I can look. I think they do actually. I think they do have RMRs, and so they're CNC machined stainless steel basically. That's so they're super sturdy. They're not going to bend and flex. So it just depends on what optic you guys are going to go for. But obviously the RMR is kind of king right now for durability. But it's up to you. But if you need insight on that, I can put you together with Roger, and you guys can communicate with whatever your department needs. So
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, with all of that, I mean, everything that you're doing here, how do you maintain that work life and side projects balance for yourself? I imagine that you have family, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm married. I've been with my wife since 2009, but we didn't get married until 2018. But yeah, it's challenging. I'm lucky that I found my wife when I did, because she puts up with all the nonsense where, I mean, it's a regular thing where I'll just text her and be like, hey, I'm not coming home on time today. And she's like, again, but she puts up with it. So it's, I'd say it's super important to try to be as present when you're actually there as you can. And that's something sometimes I struggle with, honestly, with everything going on. I'm checking emails and all that and responding to stuff. But like I said, I'm lucky that she tolerates me. And I also have some really good neighbors that we're constantly hanging out with. So community, super important. It's something I always talk about, but people have all these, people worship politicians, right? None of these politicians know who you are. If you die in a horrible car accident tomorrow, none of them are going to care. They're not even going to know. Your existence means nothing to them, but to your family and to your community, that's so much more important. So people invest all this into politics, but your family and your community should be much more important than your political affiliation. And that's something I think people need to get back to. So.
No, you're absolutely correct. Actually, everything in that statement, you're absolutely correct. It's simply your neighbor is going to be the one that's going to be there to help you first, assuming that something's occurring around your home. But that should be your first person. Your first level of community is your immediate family, then your neighbors, and then your neighborhood, and so forth, right? Instead of relying on people that have no idea who you are, and even us too in the social media world. I mean, sometimes some of the messages we get too, it's kind of like, okay, you didn't look that up on your own. And I get it. You try to be cordial, we try to answer them, but there's still that factor of, okay, let's try to teach them where to get the information from, right? So no, absolutely. So your wife, you got kids or?
No. So like I said, we got married in 2018. Kids are on the horizon, probably in the next year or two.
Oh, good.
We do have a dog, 3-year-old dog. But yeah, we're looking at kids in the next year or two.
I guess you're gonna have to sort out how to juggle even more stuff then, huh?
Yep.
I look forward to Joey. I'm sure that we'll see your adventures there. Do you have any advice for folks that are trying to get into the firearms world or somehow get more involved in their community with their neighbors or anyone just wanting to get into your field of work?
Yeah. So for your community, it's weird, right? It's a weird time right now because of we got COVID going on, and like, so my next door neighbors, for example, really awesome people, but they are very concerned about COVID because the wife in that relationship is taking medication that actually suppresses her immune system. So they have to be extra careful because if she got COVID, that's, potentially would kill her. But the more neighbors, like I hanging out with these neighbors, and then, like they introduced me to these other neighbors. Like I said, it's a weird time, but the more you can do to try to meet your neighbors and build that sense of community. As far as the career field stuff, so for law enforcement, if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to do ride-alongs and try to figure out what's going to be a good fit for you. Obviously, everyone's unique, and everyone's going to have their own perfect fit for them. For me, I'm not trying to do a whole lot else besides patrol, and I love the city I patrol in. But for some people, you want to be working undercover and doing major crimes task force stuff, my agency will not be the right fit for you, right? So do ride-alongs, ask questions, meet people, have a clean record. Don't be doing stuff that's going to get you in trouble and get you kicked out on the backgrounds process. And I get this question a lot from like high school kids, but I would say super important to go and get a degree or get educated. That is something that will get you better pay once you graduate the academy and everything. You're going to be starting at a higher step, but it's important to have something as far as education goes to fall back on in the event that law enforcement doesn't work out or you decide you want to do something else. For the military, kind of the same thing. Go and try to meet people that are in career fields that you're interested in the military. There's so many different things you can do in the military. So I would encourage folks to don't go and like ask the recruiter. There's nothing wrong with recruiters, but their job is not to like find the right fit for you. Their job is to make numbers. So try to find someone that you can trust and that will give you solid answers. And that is actually in the career field that you want to do. So if you're trying to be in special operations, you probably don't want to be talking to the finance guy. Go meet people that are actually doing what you want to do.
Right.
And then for firearms, like I was saying earlier, I try to be a good representation of the Second Amendment community, but a lot of people are super cool and are happy to take you out shooting and mentor you. The issue is there's a lot of people out there that think they know what they're doing that don't actually know what they're doing. So try to find that mentor or that friend, but kind of try to vet them a little bit and make sure that they know what they're talking about. And usually the automatic BS flag for me is if someone says they know what they're doing and then they're doing all kinds of safety violations. I don't think you know what you're doing, but yeah. Other than that, I would go out and get training. There's so many different good companies that are out there providing training to, both military law enforcement as well as citizens / civilians. So a few to list off: Guncraft Solutions, Jason Paletta is a really good dude. Centrifuge Training, that's Will Petty runs that, and they have contracts all over the place. OpTempo Training Group, that's a local guy for me. And then Ravenwing down in Southern California. And then a lot of these companies do have like social media pages. So you can kind of look through their stuff. And like I said, for me, the automatic flag is people are doing all kinds of safety violations or just weird stuff. That for me is an automatic no-go. But you can kind of do a little bit of vetting. And then you can always reach out to people that you trust and ask them like, hey, what do you think of this company?
Yeah, no, good advice. Good advice. You don't. One of my on top of your automatic red flag is one of mine is the instructors that are the tough guy instructors. The ones that go, they use terms like big boy rules and, or they'll try to downplay a product or something without giving proper explanation. It's like, okay, so that's like automatically, okay, you're just trying to sound like you're the smartest person in the room right now. But that's never the case, and that's not humble. We all know that non-humble instructors who refuse to grow further are probably not very good instructors. Do you have any life advice for folks, Joey? Just general life advice.
I came up with this a little while ago. I was on another podcast, and I knew that this guy was going to ask the question. So this podcast, he makes these podcasts for his kid to listen to, like when his kid's more grown up. But he says, "Hey, what advice do you have for my kid, for my son?" And I said, "Everyone has a story. Always be willing to hear someone else's story and make your own story one worth telling." And no one's the villain in their own story, right? And so I think a lot of the issues that we as a society have is we see somebody has this perspective and we're automatically like, hey, that guy's a bad guy because they think that way. And sometimes you are a bad person. But in a lot of these instances, like, we're not as different as the media wants us to believe that we are. And the more we can try to see things from other people's perspective, one of the things that I like saying is, instead of saying like, why am I right? Ask, how could I be wrong? And when you think with that perspective, it's actually very eye-opening. And sometimes you're not wrong, but like I said earlier, no one's the villain in their own story. So the more you can try to empathize with someone, the more likelihood you are to see at least somewhat more eye to eye, because like I said, as human beings, we're not that different. And I think that current events are very polarizing, and everyone just kind of has a different perspective on why things are the way that they are. But I think if we could kind of try to see more of that middle ground, I think people would get along a lot better.
Nice. It's very nice wisdom there. That's actually really good. really good advice. So from a police officer standpoint, do you have any wisdom or general advice for the public here?
That's a good question. So with that question, there's a lot of people that say this is how police are without actually knowing any police officers or knowing the thought process that happens with a lot of these incidents. So I see it a lot, and especially last year, that was something that my wife kind of had a hard time with, where some of her friends were, saying all these things about, oh, law enforcement, everyone's racist and this and that, and they're doing X, Y, and Z. But I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that if more people in the public got to know more police officers, you'd realize that things are not the way that they're being portrayed in the media. And police officers are normal people that are trying to do a difficult job. And a lot of the times that difficult job can be making a very difficult decision. And sometimes that decision is not the perfect decision. So like I said, I would encourage members of the general public to try to just talk to an officer and just say like, hey, what do you think of this? Or why did this happen? And sometimes in some of these situations, the officer is like blatantly wrong, right? But in a lot of these situations, just having that perspective of someone who's had law enforcement training and experience and has been in similar dangerous situations, I think that's something that could be valuable insight and perspective. So I'd encourage people to do that and don't be shy. Like I personally love it when citizens just come up and start talking to me. And I know a lot of my coworkers are the same way, especially if you have kids. Like, we have stickers and everything. So
That's excellent advice too. I can see how that can translate. Actually, the two between the law enforcement based advice as well as your personal advice too. The two just they do kind of blend together in that sense where it's the old saying where walk a mile in somebody else's shoe, and then you can understand what they're going through or how work is, especially in that career field. And we kind of have that same I guess attempt to bring people over to the firearms community is folks who are normally, I guess, adverse, or they're normally anti-gun, if you will, is we introduce them slowly, especially now in the last year or so when we have normally anti-gun people that are getting into firearms, right? And we see this now, this uprise in anti-gun people, I think it is. Yeah. But I mean, that's certainly out there because we still see folks who are gun owners who are quote unquote pro Second Amendment, but they're also for gun control. So I guess it's a learning curve for them. But no, yeah, you're absolutely correct. At least try to understand and verify the information before you make a judgment, right? A summary judgment in this case here. And that's all the questions for you folks that are watching. If you have any additional questions or something that you'd like to know from Joey, you can go over to his Instagram page. Thank you all for watching. This is episode 5 of Inside the Industry featuring Joey, aka 9mm Masashi on Instagram. So that's all we got. Take care. Go ahead and say goodbye, Joey.
Thank you guys for watching.
All right, guys, take care.